Hello, everyone. Indeed, some of you know me and know that we have been working very hard on a project called Community Service Engineering. Technology for empowerment, quality of living, technology for social profit organizations from the start has been our baseline. And I think I'll first take you back in time, and back in time means 2 years from now. So think we are 4 years younger now, and that's in fact the way that we started. This is a video that does not have any sound, so there's nothing wrong with the sound. And so that is, of course, to contextualize where we have started and to make you, or to invite you into our context of community service engineering. What we then saw back in time was that indeed a lot of projects were going on in the field of what we then have baptized community service engineering. Also a big debate went on to define that name, but I won't take you into these discussions. What you see here was indeed projects that were taking place at that time at our various institutions, and our various institutions or the organizations that are part in the project are the University of Porto, and you have already met Barbara. In a minute you will meet Christina Zandström, and Dina is also here from University West. Christine Rambouts, you've already met yesterday from RVO Society. Anka and Sabine are here from KU Leuven. And then also, of course, there are a lot of other persons from the Netherlands, amongst which Susanne and Gert and Doreen. So we were, in fact, involved in what we have called community service engineering. Here on the slide, you see what already was linked. At first, we needed to find a link amongst us, and what was there already were projects. So here is the Via Amigo project, has already been touched. In Sweden, for instance, I know from the beginning, Christina mentioned Cochlear as a company being there for hearing aids. At the University of Porto, meanwhile, a lot of brilliant projects are going on. There is also an example here. I took out an abstract. It's not a very good image I see now, but it's from the family care, the work of Doreen, where there also was a close link. So there was a lot existing already. And I haven't forgotten anyone, I hope. Also, the egg breaker from RVO Society was something that was mentioned at the time. So both high-end technology, low-end technology, a lot was happening, and that was also why we could start as a partnership, because the main question was, do we, as engineering faculties, see a value in fact, also linking our engineers to these topics? An abstract was written, a project was written, and then luckily we got approved and had funding to develop what we call community service engineering. Some more projects, I will not go into depth, but just to show a lot of project work was going on, also here in Belgium at least. And we saw also various companies in assistive technology, which you could say, we see here a trend in society as well, and not only in our close environment, but also in the wider area. Apps, for instance, also something that UNESCO, Peter Paul Verbeek is there now. We also read a document at the time emphasizing that engineering should be guided towards relevance and problem-solving approaches, global issues, challenges such as poverty reductions, which Barbara clearly has understood very well. So that was what we saw. But what we also did see was that sometimes the students that were tackling these projects, they, of course, dove into it with a lot of enthusiasm, but did not seem always how to manage the big issues that they were encountering with sometimes not satisfactory project results, not for the one, because that's also what was clearly so. And we started from a real need from society. That is what Christine explained very clearly yesterday. So there is always someone in the field who wants something for his idea in return, and the students of course want to perform well, and if that is not the case, that is also not very rewarding. So, and that was the case, and we thought that it might be necessary or needed to also build a taught program underneath this project work, and that's in fact what we did. And so what we have created is a taught program that would then better guide engineers in this kind of work to improve their project results. That was in fact our focus. Another focus was also to shed a different light on the profession of engineering. That was, I think, a sometimes unspoken wish underneath, and that also in fact motivated us to work towards this. One quote that we also found at the time, we're still back 4 years in time, was this quote of Joost Wouters, who is an emergency physician at UZ Leuven. We by accident found this quote in the newspaper, and he said, "The social dimension always had an important role in my life, and it is the motivation for my current job. As a college student, I had to make the choice between becoming a physician or an engineer. This choice was determined by the question if the job of an engineer would have enough of social dimensions. Engineering, sadly so, was not perceived in that way. That's maybe why he became a physician. Also a good choice, I would say, but we wanted to also attract students towards the engineering profession, might also be more girls, which is also often heard. So we thought that indeed by creating this taught program, we would then train engineers. Also a big discussion amongst along our track, I would say, was what engineer will we then train? Will it be a different engineer, maybe a less real, and an engineer that is not a real engineer? No, that's not the case. We wanted to create these engineers with an additional value for society. Also, we then saw that, in fact, 2 different groups of engineers would have potentially interest in what we were doing, namely the ones that would see that we were trying to train well-rounded engineers, and it would be an add-on to their personal skills, just as a good asset in society all around. And of course also the ones which would have a special interest in this social domain and would really want to work in this domain later on. We think we have developed a program for both of them. What then did we content-wise specifically develop? In fact, we developed, as we go back, 3 modules, in fact, which we have baptized user-centered design and vulnerable groups. And there are user-centered design courses. Of course, they are very, very valuable, but here we have always linked this approach towards what does it mean to be vulnerable. Another big block was organizations in the social domain, and the next one, technology in the social domain. You will see in the figure that the project work always was very central, and that in line, in fact, with what we were teaching, there were assignments in bits and pieces in order to get what we have called here the better project result, what we envisioned from the start. So it was a development with all our partners. To talk a little bit more about user-centered design and vulnerable groups and make it somewhat more specific, topics there are what is exactly vulnerability. Appreciative inquiry is, for instance, something that we have touched, which you might not know, but I don't have the time to go too far into detail. Another block, as just said, is organizations in the social domain. Of course, there are various subsectors in the social domain. There are trends. Social innovation was called, or was named by Anne Heiligen at the start of this morning. Also, third-payer models, what does it mean if we have a product? How do we actually bring it to the market? We were thinking about these things in this module, legal aspects as well. And then, of course, technology was also a very big part, where we indeed discussed about norms and international standards that would already exist. international organizations that are out there in the field. Also, what is a minimum viable product? How far can we get in this module? We explicitly also chose not to go further, not to really go to the market and touch the economic topics, because also we wanted to keep it to a program at that time of 1 year. So what is the status now? And now we're here, not 4 years back from now. So we were 6 partners, 4 partner countries. So we together have developed an educational model that starts from, as I already said, real life projects with real life project work with engineering students. So there's always project-based coursework, which is supported by the taught program that I have just briefly shown you. And we had also a big help from our Swedish partners in how we could then apply the WIL principles and start having this double loop learning, as it is called. But you will hear more about that from Christina. And the model starts, in fact, from shared learning outcomes. Also, that was a big discussion. There are various frameworks, the CDIO framework next to the EURACE framework, but we chose CDIO as a common point of starting. So now, whereas also this discussion, of course, took place, do we create one joint curriculum? Do we present everything that's the same, identical to our students? We explicitly chose not to do so, would have caused a lot of difficulties in our project, I believe. And so we really chose the path of the dynamic model, which now facilitates, because also amongst our partnership, which is probably also extraordinary, there were both university colleges as well as universities, which sometimes still have a different, which as such has a different approach. So also that, therefore, the dynamic model was clearly very well chosen. So we now, the dynamic model can in fact be used by bachelor as well as master students, can place a known emphasis, which means that a lot of autonomy stays with the partner. We have a lot of material that we share, and we make international collaboration happen. So, in fact, how do we do so? And that is what the model consists of. That is our 4 building blocks for collaboration, which I will now show. So, I suppose you will get this presentation later on, so therefore first a bit a dull slide with listed building blocks. So first there is our shared database, the database where students can find project ideas for this so-called real-life project work. It's not so-called, it's for real. They also find a design thinking template in which we in fact guide them to apply these user-centered design principles and then bring the theory of these vulnerable groups and appreciative inquiry next to it into practice. Next to it, we of course defined our shared learning outcomes that was binds us as partners, and we created a short online track based upon that, which in fact actually means that if you would have a master student who is doing his master thesis in this domain, that you could just as well give him the link of our short online track to just have a brief idea or somewhat notice of what we have developed here. But of course, and that is where the autonomy of all our partner institutions plays. We could enrich this with other teaching materials, applying it into courses that already exist and where we in fact use this material. And then the next step is to link students of the various institutions to one another. So for building blocks that are more illustrated in the next slide, it is in fact the same links. So our database, where I only, of course, could take one screenshot here to the front, but you could use the URL, dive into it, search the project ideas that are there, and that then are brought up by the various partners. And so it could just as well be that a student in Belgium takes out an idea from Portugal and start working here around such an idea. And that is also possible, but then he would need to find a social organization that is also in need of this solution, because there is interaction needed, and that is what the user-centered design process asks us to do. The design thinking template is in fact you could call it a step-by-step approach in which students are invited to do some assignments that will then enhance their process and result. not necessarily in the same order, not necessarily they do need to do all these tasks. We in fact present it as a kind of tool towards them in order to have better results. Our short online track is online, has been posted on Udemy. It's only released, I think, about a month ago and has already 400 participants now, so that goes very quickly. It has a good rating, so I hope more people will find it out there on the internet. And then this is, in fact, behind password and login. We share, in fact, all. For instance, the conference today is also being registered. We have been registering classes in the past. All this material is there, and sometimes the teacher can serve and show some abstracts to better inform the students. So that we have created this, developed this on our way. We of course needed collaboration amongst partners, not only collaboration amongst partners, but in fact on different levels. On the level of institutions, in fact, that's also where the project idea started. We really started, in fact, with the people responsible for these institutions, sending an abstract. In fact, they, had to see the benefits of starting to develop this domain for their engineers. Of course, always, if you need collaboration, there is support needed from the professors and teachers. I think they are a very crucial figure in the whole scene. And students, to my experience, are always very willing to collaborate. They are very eager about these international contacts, but they need a hand. They need to be guided in a certain way in order to make that happen. So I think what we have created is really indeed a dynamic curriculum with starting points, with also a lot of opportunities which can be extended. So what we also did regularly was organize joint webinars. For instance, Doreen was one of the lecturers during one of these webinars, where we then touched topics that would be useful for all our students. So of course, that is what a project is all about. There is a start date and there is an end date. The end date is very near now. It's the 30th of September that the project officially ends. Of course, we then start thinking about sustaining and expanding. So the first plan for the future is, of course, to maintain what has been started and to indeed keep up the international collaboration. And of course, we hope that others want to join us in this venture and that you find it interesting what we have developed here and would like to join us. For instance, there are already initiatives, organizations that we could link with. For instance, we still have a meeting planned later this month with E4S. It's a program that is also linked to engineering and has also project work in the core. So there might be a link and a path to sustainability. We might want to sustain it ourselves, but yeah, I really feel that coordination is needed. It does not go by itself, of course. If we touch the topic of sustainability, maybe a sidetrack that I do to close my presentation is also who is responsible to get from the project phase to the product phase, a little bit what also Paul Green touched in his talk. This was also something that we came across and that was not evident for us right from the start. Of course, in order to get a project from a project into a product, very often a long track is needed, a lot of validation, and it's indeed the student who leaves our institutions, so it cannot be done automatically. But of course, also here, the fact that we start from real-life project work helps. We see that very often the project ideas, which we then call finished in the status in the end, they are not really finished yet. It's a good step up for a next project. Or, of course, very often also, as we saw already, a lot of research groups at the universities, they deal with these issues as well, and they have project ideas. So it's either an organization that finds it important what that this project ideas, they are brought a step further, and or the research group. In this case, we treat, in fact, the student also as a kind of intern. We make an agreement with him, and in this case, when the project idea comes from the organization, the IP also stays with the organization. So it's in fact the organization that keeps, in fact, triggering students, and that at a certain point in time, they validate it themselves. Or in many cases, also nowadays, the student wants to do a startup for himself. And in that case, we have a different agreement where, in fact, it is stated that the IP belongs to the student and where he will be an entrepreneur, which we also very much want to stimulate. So that was a kind of sidetrack into sustainability, but then from the perspective towards the projects from the students. And I think that's what I wanted to tell you about our recent adventures as 4 partner countries. Thank you for your attention.